Chapter 11. First Jewish Settlers of Vitebsk. The story of Baruch and his journey now digresses to explore the early history of Vitebsk and how it came to be a center of Torah study. Vitebsk, which later became a great center for Jews, had until the year 1551 but a handful of Jewish people who were impoverished both materially and spiritually. Vitebsk was known as a business center, which was in the main in the hands of non-Jews. Vitebsk was situated in a fertile region producing grain and all kinds of fruits. In the year 1551, a small number of Jewish merchants came to Vitebsk to settle there. The government of the time put all sorts of difficulties and restrictions in their way, and a very limited number indeed were permitted to remain. In 1605, a Jew named Tevel settled in Vitebsk. He brought a new spirit into the place. He had a son named Nachum, his daughter-in-law was named Devorah, and their daughter, his granddaughter, was called Nechama. They were all very pious and loved the Torah with all the fire of their being, and so they immediately established the yeshiva in Vitebsk, and the yeshiva was named after them. But this does not tell the whole story. So let us hear more about Tevel and his remarkable family, at the same time learning of a most exceptional chapter in Jewish history. In the year 1570, a Jew named Nachum came to Vitebsk from Prague. Vitebsk was situated at a place which, at that time, was the border between Poland and Sweden, and which was part of the estate belonging to Count Bonch Zinkowicz, a Polish nobleman. Count Zinkowicz showed himself very kindly disposed toward the Jews of Vitebsk, who were steadily increasing in number, and particularly to this family from Prague. In the course of the next few years, the Count planned to transfer his domicile to his estates near Krakow, and was anxious, therefore, to sell his estates near Vitebsk, with all the adjoining villages, altogether comprising some 600 souls. He approached Nachum, who was by now the leader of the Jewish community of Vitebsk, inviting his help in finding him a customer. The adjoining estates on the Swedish side of the border belonged to a Swedish prince named Johann Kembati, who often visited his estates and stayed for long periods of time. It occurred to Nachum that here was a likely client for the estates of the Polish count, and so the next time the prince paid a visit to his estates on the other side of the border, Nachum arranged to call on him at the castle. Prince Kembari received Nachum in a friendly manner, and chatted with him on all sorts of subjects, but would not discuss the question of the purchase immediately. He suggested that Nachum see him again about the matter in 2 or 3 weeks' time. After a few weeks had elapsed, Nachum called again on the prince as suggested. The prince received him this time in a friendlier spirit even than the first time. He provided Nachum with a special room for his private use, and he was given every comfort and shown every consideration. The prince made an appointment to discuss the question of the purchase with Nachum on the day he came. And yet, when they met, the prince seemed in no particular hurry to talk about it. Instead, he plied Nachum with questions about Jews, of whom he knew very little. He said, but he certainly showed a great interest in them now, and seemed anxious to make up for his ignorance in the past. Nachum had to relate practically everything from the time of Avraham, and the prince listened with great attention. "You will really have to spend a few days with me at the castle," said the prince to Nachum. "There is so much that I want to ask you, but I don't want your family to be anxious about your lengthy absence, so would you send word home that you are staying here, and that you are well and comfortable?" "Very well," agreed Nachum. "I shall be glad to do all I can to help you." Nachum had never before met a non-Jew with such a genuine interest in Jews and their history. So not only did Nachum send word home that he would be delayed, but also asked that they send him some food, as he would not, of course, eat the food provided at the castle, and he had brought only enough food for a day, not expecting there would be any necessity to stay longer than that. His assistant Shalom, foreseeing the possibility that Nachum would have to spend Shabbos at the castle, brought, in addition to the food, Nachum's Shabbos clothes, including his talus, with a golden atara. He also brought Nachum's miniature Sefer Torah with its teeny ark, with its tiny ark which Nachum always kept at home and treasured very much. Nachum's ancestors were among the Jews who had been driven out of Spain during the Inquisition, and the miniature Sefer Torah, an ark, had belonged to them. So it was handed down through the generations from his great grandfather to him. The Sefer Torah was in a beautiful silver case, and the ark was made of wood, which was most artistically carved. Nachum was very pleased that his servant had brought him these treasures of his, together with his Shabbos clothes and food, for now he would really be able to enjoy Shabbos just as if he were at home, especially as he had been given a private suite of rooms for his use. When Shabbos came, Nachum dressed himself in his Shabbos clothes with his shtreimel on his head. The following morning he put on his talis with a golden atara which completely wrapped him around. During Shabbos afternoon, a messenger came from the prince, inviting Nachum to visit him. Nachum, dressed in all his fine Shabbos clothes, went along. When Nachum entered the room, the prince arose and greeted him with great respect. Nachum sensed that something was troubling the prince, whose face looked sad, and there was a hint of tears in his eyes. Nachum wondered if the prince would reveal the cause of his sorrow, but the prince did not speak about himself. He just kept on asking Nachum endless questions about Shabbos, its purpose, customs, and what it meant to the Jews. Again and again he came back to the subject of the Jews. He couldn't seem to get to know quickly enough. Nachum was sure there was some special reason behind all this unusual interest in questioning about Jews on the part of a non-Jew. Soon everything was made clear to him, for while they were talking, an elderly lady entered the room with great dignity. One could immediately recognize by her stately bearing that she belonged to the aristocracy. "This is my aunt, my mother's sister," said the prince to Nachum, and turning to his aunt, he introduced Nachum, saying, "And this gentleman, dear aunt, is the friend I told you about, whose acquaintance we are so fortunate to have made." When the aunt showed the same keen interest in learning all about Jews exactly as the prince had done, Nachum realized there was indeed special significance in their questioning. He did not remark upon this, though, as he felt they would take him into their confidence as soon as they found the time opportune. During the whole conversation, Nachum saw a look of indecision in the eyes of the old lady, as if she could not quite make up her mind whether or not to tell him their secret. But Nachum did not show he noticed anything unusual in her manner. The following Monday, Nachum was again called to the prince, and when he entered the prince's chamber, his aunt was again present. They both greeted him as if he were an old friend. It was clear that they intended to speak to him freely and take him into their confidence. This is the story they unfolded to Nachum, who listened in wonder and with great interest.